Yes, it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to run through a bunch of slides. I hope I can reach the conclusion, which shows where we are at this time. Speaking about let's see if I get the right button here. There we go. Just for those of you who don't know where the South Fork is, it's the blue system there with the red dotted about the Skookum Creek Hatchery. This is what we found. The red line sort of indicates the numbers of Chinook we found in the South Fork with our current methods, but we found out that we actually didn't have any of the South Fork fish. We had a large input of fish that apparently comes from the North Fork supplementation program. We started a program to address this low number of South Fork Chinook. And what happened was, first we tried to get adults. There was an original program that didn't really succeed well because they had to get adults from far upstream, and these guys are very difficult to get in the stream as adults. We tried a weir for 3 years, and this was generally the result each one of those years. We saw that we weren't doing well in getting adults. We basically then sent people out to get juveniles. And Steve Seymour was one of the people that was involved with saying, hey, we can't get adults, let's make some adults. The problem was we had 3 different types of Chinook, and you don't want to start mixing them up because they have unique characteristics. And so what happened was we would go up, catch the Chinook, bring them down to the Skookum Creek Hatchery, and all of the data for each individual fish was recorded. They were put in these boxes in the incubators depending on their size. We took a tissue sample for each one, and relating the tissue sample to the number and the tray position, a week later we would get a result saying that's a South Fork fish. And then when we identified South Fork fish, we had to let go all of the non-South Fork fish, and we took all of the South Fork fish to Kendall Creek Hatchery, which has had a long history in rearing the North Fork stock. And it took a little while because people weren't used to taking smolts from the wild and feeding them. The first group that we put up there, I think people went out in the streams and got grubs and the like to feed them, and then they got tubifex worms, and finally got them so that they would eat regular fish food. And this shows different stages. They had to be sorted by size to make sure that the growth was adequate. We had to, again, get different sized containers to hold them. After a while, this is what they look like, and these were fish reared in freshwater. We actually had the fish, all of the fish that we caught as juveniles and identified as South Fork were reared for the better part of a year until they smolted at Kendall Creek, and then half of them were sent to the Manchester Research Station for grow out in saltwater. And I'm mushing together a number of different processes. Each one of them had a specific challenge. But this was the end result. We spent a lot of money building this facility down at Manchester. You can see that the government does it in a great way. But these are the fish that were produced. So these were the captive brood that we were able to get after about 3 to 5 years. And we then brought the captive brood back to Skookum Creek. And this shows the transfer facility. And we had a pond there that we kept them in until they matured. And then they were spawned. But since we had families, you didn't want to breed brothers and sisters. We had a lot of geneticists involved in this. And so each fish, as it was growing up and reached a certain stage, was implanted with a tag and another tissue sample taken so that you could identify who that fish was whenever it matured. And so you can see staff at the computer had a database with all these different fish in. You knew who was related to whom. And that was how the breeding was done. And what actually happened was, as you can see off to the side, eggs were taken from a female. The name, number of that female was identified. Sperm was taken from a male. The number, that male was identified. It was run through the computer to make sure they weren't related. And then it was spawned. They went first into the incubation trays, where they spent 2 or 3 months. When they were hatched and reached a stage, they were put into small rearing tanks, and then they were transferred again after they got on feed. They were transferred to an outside complex. And you can see this facility here. This is during construction. I haven't been able to get out and get more recent picture, but this is a recirculation system, which allows us to use a little bit of water to take care of a lot of fish. This tank up at the front basically is recirculating. It has a process for taking sediments out, for ultraviolet light screening to take care of any pathogens, anything that might be in there that would be detrimental. And then when they reach sub-yearling stage, about 70 to 80 millimeters, they are transferred from their rearing tanks and they run through a tagging trailer. And that's this slide in the lower left, where each one of them is injected with a small piece of wire that has a number on it. And this is how we identify the fish when they come back. All of the Chinook in the watershed are marked in such a way that you can identify where they came from, what stock they are, when they were released, and how old they are. This particular group is only identifiable by that internal metal tag. All the other fish either have a tag and an adipose fin clip or a simple adipose fin clip, and they can be identified in the future by looking at the otolith, which is the ear bone, which is each one is individually marked. So we have 3 different ways of identifying where a fish came from. After they are passed through the tagging machine, they are put into some very large rearing ponds for about another month, and then they're volitionally released from the facility. And here we are at some results. You can see that our first release was a paltry 1900. This is a table Steve may remember. We tried to project how many fish we would expect back. So we used a fairly low survival rate, 0.3%. And so that first column is the number of that whole brood release that we expected to return from the ocean. And we had 2 estimates of what proportion would be 3-year-olds returning and what proportion would be 4-year-olds. And then at the far side, we have a projection of the catch year, which would have the 4-year-olds plus 3-year-olds, if you can follow that. That's 3-year-olds for the current year and the 4-year-olds from the previous brood year. But anyway, you can see that we reached a peak of 677,000 released in 2013. Our original goal was to basically get 1,000 juveniles and raise half of them in seawater, half of them in freshwater. And we expected that to actually peak somewhere around 1 million. We didn't quite hit that, but 677,000 is not too bad. This just gives you a clear indication of how we're progressing in terms of releasing sub-yearlings. The bottom number is of some interest because we are declining in the numbers of captive brood, and we found that some of them spend a lot more time maturing than the normal fish. So we got some 7, 8-year-old fish out there. But in 2017, we were able to make half of that number from volunteers to the hatchery. So you might be asking, what do we see in returns? Well, in 2014, we had 24 males, 83% of them were identifiable by that tag as program fish. In 2015, we got 949 males, and of those, 466 were South Fork 2-year-olds, which you will notice in the table I had at the beginning, we didn't even count 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds are not really common. But we did get 14 females, 9 of which were South Fork spawned to give us 38,000 in 2015. And in 2016, we saw another jump. We had 1,600 males, and 1,100 of those were South Fork. We had 114 females, 99 of which were South Fork and successfully spawned to give us 465,000 eggs and resulting in a release of 353,000 sub-yearlings. And the question is, how long can we carry this out? Were you close?
Yeah, we're
okay. We're running out of captive brood. These are just some thoughts to keep in mind, and this actually was taken from a 3-hour section we had in an AFS meeting, so there's a lot of interest all the way across the board in how you got the juveniles, how you raised them in different environments. Anybody who wants to hear about that, we'll be happy to talk about it later. Returning spawners to the hatchery are not the total production because these are contributing to the catch. They're not found in the fishery because they don't have that clip of the adipose fin, which gets them looked at. We are seeing some evidence now that the timing of the South Fork stock may be slightly different than the timing of the North Fork stock, and if that's the case, is it applicable to use the same tagging information to estimate the ocean catches for the North Fork stock applicable to the South Fork stock? The real nervous part is, will the returns support the supplementation program? The concept was if you put enough South Fork fish, they would knock the other fish out of there. And what the tribe is interested in is to getting enough fish to sustain a fishery. And I guess I'll leave it at that.